Hey guys, tonight we're diving deep into royal corridors, heavy with incense and riddled with drama, to uncover the most embarrassing deaths in royal history. Imagine you're draped in velvet robes, the scent of crushed rose petals drifting from your collar, and you've just leaned back in a creaky throne chair when... oops. One misplaced word, one puffed up ego, one terribly timed meal, and your royal life ends in the most awkward way possible. Some of these deaths are so absurd you might wonder how they ever made it into the annals of history. From explosive funerals to toilet tragedies, you're about to tiptoe through centuries of royal awkwardness. And honestly, you probably won't survive this episode. From laughter, that is. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is. Midnight in Manila? 3 a.m. in Berlin? I see you nocturnal historians. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through a candlelit palace, its stone walls echoing with laughter. But not just any laughter, manic, unrelenting laughter. The kind that curls your toes and makes the servants exchange glances. At the center of this hilarity, King Martin of Aragon, one of the last monarchs of medieval Spain. And he's laughing too hard. The year is 1410. King Martin isn't doing too hot. He's obese, aging, and bedridden from digestive issues that are, let's just say, not dinner table friendly. You're summoned to his chamber late one evening, the kind of room that smells faintly of musk, incense, and something less noble. There, reclining like a half-deflated cushion on his silken bed, is Martin. The story goes that Martin had just eaten a goose. Not just any goose, mind you, a goose stuffed with eels. Why? Because royal kitchens exist to outdo themselves. That night, Martin calls for his court jester, who arrives fashionably late, flustered and puffing from his run through the torchlit halls. "Where have you been?" Martin wheezes. The jester bows, his hat bells jingling, and replies, "I was at the vineyard, your majesty, watching a young deer hang by its tail from a tree. As I watched, it gave birth." Pause. Picture the absurdity. A deer hanging upside down, giving birth. Martin, already gassy from goose and giggling from indigestion, loses it. He laughs. And laughs. And laughs. Some say he laughed for 3 full minutes without pause. At the tail end of this hysterical fit, he clutches his belly, gasps for air, and just like that, dies. Now historians still argue whether it was laughter that killed him, or the accumulated pressure of overeating and gut inflammation. A fatal intestinal blockage seems most likely. But the goose joke timing? Chef's kiss comedy. In the dark corners of dusty royal archives you find marginalia. Notes scribbled by medieval monks who didn't know whether to weep or snort with laughter at this bizarre passing. Imagine trying to write a serious obituary. Here lies Martin, 4th of his name, slain by goose-related laughter. And here's the kicker. Martin left no clear heir. His embarrassing exit launched what became known as the Interregnum of Aragon, a 2-year period of dynastic confusion, regional squabbling, and political tug-of-war. Basically, his death sent a whole kingdom into existential crisis, all because of a joke about a deer in a tree. One fringe theory, whispered among historical conspiracy forums and delightfully questionable documentaries, suggests the jester may have been a plant, sent by a rival house to finish the king with laughter. Kind of like weaponized stand-up. But, alas, no poisoned juggling balls were ever found. As you sit in the now silent chamber of King Martin, the only sound is the dying echo of laughter against old stone. A grand, ridiculous end for a man who once ruled over one of Europe's most vibrant courts. If you ever thought you might die from laughing too hard, just know, it has happened. And in royal company, no less. You follow the scent of orange blossom and sweat through a golden hallway, one so heavily perfumed it could probably be seen from space. This is Versailles, baby, and you're entering the world of Louis XIV, the Sun King himself. The most majestic man in France, and possibly the smelliest. Louis XIV doesn't die from a fall or a duel, no. His final days are soaked in ritual, powder, and a level of pomp so intense it starts to rot. Literally. The year is 1715. You tiptoe into the opulent court where everything reeks of roses. But not in a good way. Imagine spraying cologne into an old, sweaty boot. Now imagine that boot is wearing a powdered wig and speaking fluent French. Voila, Versailles. Louis, now in his 70s, is mostly leg. And that leg? Gangrenous. Yes, the Sun King's mighty end comes courtesy of infected limbs and blood that won't behave. Historians agree that it was likely diabetic gangrene that finished him off. But the final weeks? A smelly parade of awkward denial and ritualized chaos. You stand in the king's chamber, which is somehow still full of courtiers. This is a man who turned daily waking up into a royal ceremony. Yes, his lever, like where nobles would crowd in to watch him open his royal eyes, was a whole thing. Imagine being so important people fight for the right to see you yawn. But by 1715, the glamorous routine is getting hard to sustain. Louis's leg is blackening. His breath smells like sour wine and regret. And yet, the ceremony must go on. Powder, perfume, layers of embroidered silk, all atop a leg that's basically falling off. You start to suspect that the scented oils and elaborate wigs are no longer just fashion. They're defense mechanisms. A lesser-known but absolutely chef's kiss detail. The royal doctors didn't think cutting off the leg would help. Their remedy? Slathering it in ointment so pungent the entire court smells like overcooked herbs for days. And the smells weren't just on the king. Versailles itself was, well, it was gorgeous. But hygienic? Not even close. There were no proper bathrooms in the palace when it was built. Courtiers relieved themselves behind tapestries and stairwells and, if you were really classy, into golden chamber pots right there during long royal meetings. You're not even safe in the gardens. One English visitor wrote that the entire place stank of urine. That's right, even the fountains couldn't hide the eau de paix. Some fringe accounts even claim that Louis died from the poisons in his overused perfumes. The king was known to bathe infrequently, but douse himself daily in floral concoctions. Lavender, musk, even ambergris, which, fun fact, is whale vomit. Combine that with open wounds and questionable hygiene, and yeah, maybe that was what did him in. Historians still argue whether it was diabetes, gangrene, or possibly even skin infections from the powdered wigs themselves. Those towering fluff monsters weren't just itchy, they were laced with lead. And not the metaphorical kind. As Louis's condition worsens, his courtiers perform a strange ballet of denial. No one wants to be the first to admit the king is dying. It's a game of scent and dagger. You watch as perfumed fans flutter, forced smiles freeze, and nobles start subtly stepping back, like trying to avoid sitting next to someone on the bus with a suspicious cough. One particularly tragicomic moment. In his final days, Louis, now a crumpled sun dimming in a bed of lace, tries to give a speech to his heir, a child. "Don't imitate me," he says. "I have loved war too much." You can almost hear the Versailles chandeliers weeping, and then he's gone. The ceremony of death takes over. His body is embalmed, dressed, and paraded. But the gangrene, it refuses to leave the party. The stench is so bad that mourners faint. Some accounts claim the royal corpse exploded during the funeral from the internal gases, trapped beneath the layers of silks and ointments. Is it true? Historians debate this one with a side eye and a raised brow. Still, his death, drenched in rosewater, humiliation, and denial, marks the end of an era. France would never smell quite the same again. And you? You exit the palace with your nose permanently confused. A place where the most powerful man in Europe lived in a perfumed fever dream, only to die surrounded by stink and sycophants. Glamorous? Maybe. Tragic? For sure. Embarrassing? Oh, absolutely. Your footsteps echo down a cold, damp stone corridor, the kind that gets narrower the further you go, until finally you come to the last place any self-respecting monarch wants to die. The royal latrine. Tonight you're visiting King Edmund Ironside, the short-reigned but sharply named ruler of England in the early 11th century. A warrior king with a reputation for grit and defiance, Edmund had fought off the Danes, survived betrayals, and earned his intimidating nickname, not from a suit of armor, but from his sheer unshakable resolve. Unfortunately, there are some things even iron wills and iron backsides can't protect you from. It's 1016. The kingdom is tense, fragile like a freshly baked meat pie. Edmund has been king for just a few months. He's young, brave, and, by all reports, terrible at sitting still. You see him pacing stone halls, arguing with advisors, eating meals of boiled meats and bitter ale, and planning how to wrest full control of England from the invading Danish king, Snut the Great. But one afternoon, Edmund excuses himself to take care of business, which, back then, means squatting over a deep hole in a wooden bench with not much more than your dignity separating you from the abyss. And here's where the story splits. Historians still argue whether the king died of natural causes, a sudden hemorrhage, or something far darker. Because one chronicler, who might have had a flair for medieval shock value, claims this: a Danish assassin hid inside the latrine pit, and as Edmund sat down to relieve himself, drove a blade straight up where the sun famously does not shine. Now pause. Imagine being the assassin. Just imagine that job briefing. Right, Harold, you'll be posted in this dung-filled pit for, could be hours, possibly days. No, you can't bring a torch, and no, don't forget your poking stick. It's one of history's most uncomfortable what-ifs. Did the Iron King really meet his end in a royal porta-potty ambush? More likely. Scholars suspect a sudden intestinal rupture or anal ulcer, which, if we're being honest, still doesn't look great on a tombstone. And yet the latrine legend stuck. Because in the brutal storytelling world of medieval politics, how you died mattered almost as much as when. And nothing says divine disapproval like dying on the loo. The tale got passed down, retold in monasteries with snickers behind candlelight. Kings die in battle or in bed surrounded by weeping nobles, not like this. It made Edmund the punchline of 11th century dark humor, the king who couldn't even catch a break while answering nature's call. You walk through the royal hall later that evening. The throne sits cold and empty, and in its place, the quiet whisper of awkward legacy. No epic poem, no gilded statue, just the image of a king and a very unlucky toilet seat. And perhaps the worst part? Edmund had just made peace with Nut. The two had agreed to split England, and the crown would fully pass to Nut if Edmund died. Which, embarrassingly, he did. Almost immediately. That sealed the fate of Anglo-Saxon resistance. Within weeks, Canute took full control. The kingdom changed hands and history with one slip, one stab, or one fateful rupture. And if you think people in power forgot, they didn't. Later kings referenced Edmund's story not with reverence, but as a warning. Don't get too proud. Even the iron ones fall. Sometimes while squatting. The torchlight flickers across ancient marble, casting long shadows on rusted iron rings and cracked columns. You're now in the vast, sun-baked plains of the East. Persia, to be exact. The air hums with dust and humiliation, because tonight you find yourself standing beside Emperor Valerian, ruler of the Roman Empire, and its most royally degraded prisoner. It's the 3rd century CE. Valerian has marched east to put down the growing threat of the Sasanian Empire. He's old, sure, but still commanding in that weary Roman way. Toga sharp, voice deep, jaw carved from frustration. He's got legions behind him, and an ego inflated by years of holding the crumbling empire together. But then, disaster. In 260 CE, he's defeated and captured by the Persian king Shapur of Faris at the Battle of Edessa. And just like that, the mighty Roman emperor becomes history's only reigning Roman emperor to be taken alive by an enemy. Yikes. And if that weren't humiliating enough. What happens next launches Valerian from footnote to full-blown embarrassment legend. You're chained beside him in a dusty Sasanian encampment. He's not dead. Oh no. Shapur keeps him around as a living trophy. Imagine being paraded around like a human souvenir. Sources say Valerian was used as a literal human footstool. Yep. Whenever Shapur wanted to mount his horse, he allegedly had Valerian kneel so he could step on his back. It gets worse. Some say Shapur used him for public mockery, forcing him to serve wine at court banquets. Others claim Roman envoys sent to negotiate were made to witness their former emperor groveling on the floor, half naked and bruised. Historians still argue whether these stories are exaggerated propaganda, tall tales whispered by gossipy scribes or Persian braggarts. But the thing is, nobody really defends Valerian's dignity. Even Roman sources go suspiciously quiet. And then comes the most disturbing part. One ancient account by Lactantius, early Christian writer and shade thrower, claims that when Valerian finally died, his body was flayed, stuffed with straw, and mounted like a mannequin in a temple. Just displayed there. As a, look what we did to the Romans. Statement piece. Imagine being the centerpiece in your enemy's trophy room, forever posed like a grim mannequin in emperor cosplay. That's not just losing, that's posthumous obliteration. Modern historians do roll their eyes at this one a bit. Some think the skin-stuffing thing was Christian propaganda meant to show what happens to pagan rulers who mess with the faithful. Others think it's too weird not to be partially true. You decide. But no matter how he went out, Valerian's fall remains one of the most embarrassing episodes in imperial history. Not just because he lost, but because his enemies played with him, literally. You walk through the ruins of the ancient city of Bishapur, where legend says Valerian's body, or its leathery shell, was kept. There's no museum label, no plaque, just the desert wind brushing sand over shame. And when later emperors marched east, you can bet they remembered the man who became a doormat. Rome's golden eagle turned into a royal joke, a warning passed down like a bedtime horror story for future Caesars. Let this be a lesson, whispered through time. Conquer with caution, and maybe never trust an enemy king who smiles too much. The air is thick, not with incense or candle smoke this time, but with something worse. You're in a cramped, sweaty chapel, standing uncomfortably close to a bloated corpse, and everyone around you is trying very hard not to gag. Welcome to King William the Conqueror's funeral, where even in death, this monarch manages to make things awkward. It's 1087. William I, yes, the William the Conqueror, Duke of Normandy, invader of England, winner at Hastings, is finally meeting his end. But not on a battlefield, no. After decades of ruling two kingdoms and wrecking medieval real estate wherever he went, William meets his match in a saddle. The king had grown rather portly in his later years, enough so that when his horse stumbled while he was leading a siege in Mantes in modern-day France, the saddle jammed his abdomen with such force that it ruptured his intestines. You heard that right. The horse didn't even fall. It just moved the wrong way, and pop goes the belly. You follow the trail of moaning and blood-soaked linen as he's hauled back to Rouen. There he lingers in a feverish stupor for several days, gasping prayers and regretting a few choices, like, say, burning whole towns down in the name of conquest. His last words reportedly included an apology. I've persecuted the church and my people. It's probably not going to go well for me now. Spoiler, it doesn't. He dies alone, with most of his noble companions already skipping off to secure their claims. His body is abandoned for hours, maybe even days, in a stone room during a heat wave. Because of course it's hot. Too hot. And so begins the truly humiliating part. The funeral arrangements are a mess. His retainers finally decide to bury him at the Abbey of Saint-Étienne in Caen, a church he himself had commissioned. But when they arrive, surprise, a local noble claims that the land was stolen from his family and refuses to allow the burial. Cue awkward negotiations at the gravesite, with monks and mourners standing around holding a very dead, very swelling body. Eventually, someone pays the man off, and the burial proceeds. The grave is dug. The coffin is lowered. Only it isn't, because they made the coffin too small. The king's bloated corpse will not fit. You watch the panicked glances, the strained whispers. A few unfortunate monks attempt to force the body into the stone sarcophagus, shoving, twisting, adjusting limbs like a morbid game of medieval Tetris. And then, bang. A loud pop echoes through the chapel. William's abdomen bursts. The smell is immediate, vile, unholy. Gas and partially decomposed fluids spray outward, soaking nearby mourners. One priest faints. Another throws up in his sleeve. You step back quickly, instinctively covering your face. But it's too late. You are now part of the most infamous funeral fail in Western history. Contemporary chroniclers were unusually frank about the incident. One monk wrote that the church was infected with a terrible stench, and that the crowd had to flee before the rites were completed. Historians still argue whether the explosion really happened, or if this was a colorful exaggeration by writers who really didn't like the Norman conquest. But several accounts agree the coffin was too small, the body was in bad shape, and things went viscerally wrong. Fringe theories? Oh, they're out there. Some say the mishandling of William's corpse was divine punishment for his harsh rule. Others blame it on poor embalming practices and the famously terrible hygiene standards of medieval medicine. Still others whisper that the whole story was made up by bitter Saxon monks with a flair for drama. But whether or not he truly went boom, the image stuck. William the Conqueror, who once led armies across the English Channel, changed the face of British history and had popes writing him fan mail, went out with a whimper and a squelch. You leave the abbey as the sun sets, the scent of frankincense struggling to mask something far less holy. The chapel would later be rebuilt, restored, reblessed, but no amount of holy water could quite wash away the memory of the day the king blew up. So next time you think history is all clean lines and majestic endings, remember William. Mighty in life, mildly horrifying in death. The ultimate reminder that even the greatest rulers are just squishy meatbags underneath all that gold. The flicker of candlelight dances across a gaudy hall painted with toy soldiers. You can hear laughter, high-pitched, hiccuping, and definitely drunken, as you make your way through the gilded corridors of a crumbling Russian palace. Tonight, you're attending the tragicomic final days of Tsar Peter III, the emperor who ruled Russia for 6 whole months, and then maybe drank himself straight into a coffin. It's 1762. Russia is a powdered-wig pressure cooker, and at the center of it all is Peter. Gangly, impulsive, obsessed with playing war games using actual toy soldiers. Yes, he's emperor of one of the largest empires on Earth, and yet he spends hours recreating miniature Prussian battles in his royal drawing room, complete with tiny cannons and trumpet fanfares. He's like a man-child with a crown and zero impulse control. Peter worships Frederick the Great of Prussia. It's kind of awkward since Russia just fought a war against Prussia. But Peter doesn't care. In fact, he reverses Russian military policy overnight, annoying literally everyone who's not a Prussian fangirl. Meanwhile, you follow him into one of his favorite pastimes: loud, boozy, barely coherent court banquets. And boy, does this man party. He downs entire bottles of schnapps and beer in one sitting, challenges nobles to drinking contests he never wins, and once allegedly tried to make a palace jester a general. The man is a walking PR crisis. At the heart of this mess stands Catherine, his far more competent wife. You might know her as Catherine the Great, and she is not amused. While Peter's stumbling through another pretend battle, Catherine is quietly meeting with generals and plotting, well, a very grown-up coup. Historians still argue whether Peter knew what was coming. Some say he suspected Catherine's ambition. Others believe he was so deluded by his toy army and beer steins that he simply did not notice his empire slipping away. Honestly, either scenario feels on brand. Then, one July morning, you're suddenly surrounded by real soldiers, not Peter's toys, but Catherine's guards. They take control of the palace in a bloodless flash. Peter is arrested and shuffled off to a country estate. Catherine ascends the throne almost seamlessly, welcomed by nobles who are tired of watching their ruler try to command rubber ducks in the royal bath. Here's where it gets blurry. Peter dies 8 days after the coup. Officially, it's ruled as a severe attack of hemorrhoidal colic. Yep. The cause of death was literally listed as butt pain, but no one believes that. Other versions suggest Peter got drunk, again, at the estate and fell into a brawl with one of his guards. Some accounts say he was strangled in a drunken rage. Others that it was a cold, quiet assassination made to look like natural causes. One fringe theory even suggests he accidentally drowned himself during a drunken stumble into a wash basin. Realistically, it was probably a staged accident, a quiet removal to avoid messier headlines. But the hemorrhoid excuse? That's Catherine's people covering their tracks with a little cheeky flair. And, oh, the legacy. Peter became that guy. The ruler who turned his bedroom into a Prussian military shrine. The monarch who was overthrown by his wife without firing a shot. The man who may have died trying to reenact a war on his bedroom floor with wooden horses. Catherine, meanwhile, becomes one of the greatest rulers in Russian history. Efficient, brilliant, occasionally ruthless, she rewrites the narrative. Peter becomes a hiccup, a hungover footnote. And yet, his death lingers. You still hear whispers in St. Petersburg taverns about the drunken emperor who giggled his way out of power and passed from history with schnapps on his breath. Let that be a lesson, friend. If you ever find yourself leading an empire, maybe don't prioritize toy soldiers over real politics. And for heaven's sake, pace yourself at the royal open bar. The air tonight is thick with roast meat and regret. You're seated at a long, candlelit banquet table groaning under the weight of decadent dishes. Meat pies, bowls of candied fruits, heaps of sauerkraut, and an alarming number of semlas, those Swedish sweet rolls filled with almond paste and whipped cream. Welcome to the Last Supper of King Adolf Frederick of Sweden, a man whose appetite for snacks may have been more dangerous than any assassin's blade. It's 1771. King Adolf is, well, not exactly the most powerful monarch in Swedish history. He's more of a figurehead, his authority heavily limited by Sweden's parliament, the Riksdag. While other rulers worry about wars or plots, Adolf worries about dinner. You glance over as he leans back in his ornate chair, napkin tucked into his collar, cheeks flushed with satisfaction. He's feasting. Not just politely nibbling or savoring a favorite dish. This man is devouring a meal with the zeal of someone trying to impress Odin himself. And what a meal it is. Lobster, caviar, kippers, sauerkraut, champagne. Then 14 servings of semla rolls soaked in hot milk. Yes, 14. You watch in stunned silence as he wipes his mouth, and he declares the meal exquisite and retires for the evening. Except, he never wakes up. By morning, the king is dead. The official cause? Digestive problems and overexertion from eating. One physician delicately referred to it as a fatal case of indigestion. a royal death by snack attack. Honestly, it's so absurd it almost feels poetic. Historians still argue whether the Semmelas actually killed him. Was it a stroke? A heart attack? A pre-existing condition perhaps worsened by his smorgasbord of dairy and pickled fish? Maybe. But no one ever forgets the roles. In Sweden, this story is legendary. You can't eat a semla without someone cracking a joke about the king who ate himself to death. His gluttony has become folklore, half fact, half food-shaming fairy tale. What's fascinating, though, is that Adolf Frederick wasn't some monstrous overeater. He was just a little too fond of comfort, a little too passive to rule, a man whose greatest power move was taking a third helping. But you know who was powerful? His son, Gustav III. After his father's desert demise, Gustav takes the throne and becomes one of Sweden's most dynamic reformist kings. It's almost like the universe had to clear the stage, with whipped cream and irony. One little-known quirk? Adolf Frederick was an enthusiastic craftsman. He loved woodworking, often sneaking off to carve miniature chests and candle holders with his own royal hands. Imagine that, a king more comfortable in a wood shop than a war room. You walk past his favorite stool, hand-carved, polished, and tiny compared to the throne, and feel a pang of sympathy. Maybe he never wanted to rule. Maybe he just wanted to whittle and snack in peace. But monarchies don't work like that, and so his legacy, sealed forever in pastry. Each Fat Tuesday as Swedes line up in bakeries for semlas, they whisper his name. Sometimes with mockery, sometimes with an affectionate chuckle, but always with the understanding that this guy died in the most relatable way possible. You trail away from the banquet hall, the scent of cardamom and sweet cream still thick in the air. The plates are cold, the throne is empty, and in the silence you hear a soft burp echo from history. Let this be your bedtime reminder. There's such a thing as too many desserts, even when you're royalty. You step into a damp, salt-laced wind, the kind that stings your cheeks and makes wallpaper curl at the corners. You're in a gloomy house on the lonely island of St. Helena, far from Parisian silk and golden thrones. This is the last residence of Napoleon Bonaparte, emperor, general, and, according to some, accidental interior design victim. It's 1821. Napoleon's once thunderous legacy has shrunk to a sickly shadow, pacing the damp floors of Longwood House. You follow the creak of his boots as he shuffles past floral wallpaper that, well, you'll want to remember that wallpaper. He's surrounded not by armies, but by a skeleton crew of loyal servants and skeptical British jailers. The man who crowned himself Emperor of the French now lives under constant supervision, served gray meat on chipped porcelain, muttering half the day and scrawling his frustrations in letters no one reads. He's unwell, that much is clear. He's losing weight, struggling with stomach pain, and growing increasingly irritable. By spring, he's bedridden, racked with nausea, weakness, and a melancholy so heavy it weighs down the curtains. Now let's pause for a second. The official story? Napoleon died of stomach cancer like his father before him. It runs in the family. The autopsy performed by his British captors noted a large ulcer and lesions consistent with cancer. Simple, right? Well, not quite. Historians still argue whether Napoleon really died of cancer or something more sinister, because there's a second theory that's been making historians and conspiracy theorists twinkle for years. Arsenic poisoning. And here's where the story gets spicy. In 1961, scientists tested a preserved lock of Napoleon's hair and found unusually high levels of arsenic. Enough to raise eyebrows, if not alarms. Was he murdered? Did someone slowly slip poison into his wine? His food? Maybe. But the plot thickens, literally, when you look at the wallpaper. Yes, wallpaper. The rooms of Longwood House were lined with gorgeous patterned paper dyed with Scheele's green, a pigment containing, you guessed it, arsenic. And in a damp climate like St. Helena, that arsenic doesn't stay put. It molds, it vaporizes. It seeps into the air like a slow, stylish assassin. You picture it. Napoleon lying in his chamber, breathing in microscopic poisons from florals that whisper death with every damp breeze. Death by design. One fringe theory even claims the British knew this and chose the wallpaper on purpose. A silent execution masked as decor. Of course, that's never been proven, but boy, it does have flair. What makes this death so deeply embarrassing isn't just that he was defeated. It's that Napoleon, whose life was a symphony of cannon fire and opera-level speeches, ended up dying quietly, wrapped in floral curtains, maybe killed by his own wallpaper. You glance at his journal where he writes about his failing body and recurring stomach aches. In one entry, he wonders aloud if he's being poisoned. But the world is done listening. He's just the lonely emperor now, pacing between arsenic-laced walls and memories of glory. And the kicker? His tomb in Paris is gigantic, ornate, towering, almost comically overcompensating. You walk its echoing halls, and it's hard not to chuckle at the size. A monument to a man who may have been undone by bad wallpaper and colonial humidity. The lesson here? You can survive revolutions, outwit monarchies, redraw the map of Europe, but if you sleep under toxic wallpaper, you're still doomed. So next time you're redecorating, maybe double-check the paint. You descend into a stone-walled tunnel, the air growing heavier with each step. Moisture clings to your skin, and the only light comes from a flickering torch held by a man who insists on whispering. You're in the bowels of a medieval city, chasing down one of history's most mysterious royal exits, the death of Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II, the ruler who may have literally flushed away his dignity. It's the mid-13th century, and Frederick II is not your average king. He's brilliant, multilingual, suspiciously curious about science, and according to many contemporaries, very weird. He kept pet leopards, tried to teach chickens Latin, and once allegedly sealed a baby in a silent room just to see if the child would naturally speak Hebrew. Spoiler? It didn't. This is a man who regularly clashed with the Pope, dabbled in alchemy, and kept a harem of scholars, astrologers, and exotic animals. In his prime, he styled himself as the Stupor Mundi, the wonder of the world. But by the 1250s, his wonder is starting to wear thin. You're in Apulia, southern Italy, where Frederick's enemies are circling and his empire is starting to fray. He's growing paranoid, more secretive, more withdrawn. His health is declining too. He suffers from chronic illness, likely gastrointestinal, and now he's traveling constantly, rarely sleeping in the same place twice. You can almost feel the desperation hanging on his cloak like mildew. And then comes the truly bizarre part. Rumors swirl that Frederick died in a sewer. One of the fringe, but persistent, theories goes like this. Facing rebellion and betrayal, Frederick tried to flee or hide by escaping through a tunnel or drain beneath his castle. During the escape, or perhaps while hiding in the muck, he succumbed to illness, and his body was later recovered and presented for a more dignified burial. Now, let's be clear. Mainstream historians reject this version. Most agree he died in Castel Fiorentino, in a fairly respectable bed, after a bout of dysentery or similar affliction. His last words were allegedly, "I am dying," spoken in Latin, which, let's be real, is a pretty solid way to go out if you're trying to be dramatic. But others point to the lack of witnesses, the strange gaps in the record, and the suspicious timing. Frederick had many enemies, and his death helped several of them consolidate power. It's possible the story was sanitized, his real end too embarrassing or inconvenient to record. Historians still argue whether his body was properly embalmed, as was customary for imperial rulers. Some claim it decomposed too quickly, that it was found in a strangely disheveled state, fueling more speculation that he died somewhere unroyal. Even weirder? Medieval prophecy. Frederick was the subject of numerous legends that claimed he would never die, or that he'd return in 1,000 years to save the Holy Roman Empire. These stories grew so popular that even centuries later, German peasants would claim to see Frederick wandering the mountains, or sleeping inside a hollow hill, waiting for his time. So now you've got a potent cocktail: a legendary emperor, a murky death, a possibly humiliating location, and a future ghost story career. You leave the castle ruins under a pale moon, stepping carefully around overgrown foundations and crumbled stone. Somewhere beneath your feet may lie the truth. Was Frederick a sick, tired ruler gasping out Latin prayers? Or a desperate man crawling through sludge, undone by his own obsession with secrecy? Either way, his tomb rests in Palermo Cathedral, draped in red porphyry like a Roman Caesar. Impressive. But part of you can't help wondering if his soul still smells like sewage. Let this tale sink in gently. Even the greatest thinkers, the men who tried to outwit time itself, are only ever one bad stomach bug, or sewage tunnel, away from embarrassment. You wade into the sultry heat of 19th century Siam, where golden rooftops shimmer in the sunlight, and the scent of lotus blossoms hovers in the air like gossip. Everything feels orderly, ritualized, reverent. Until, of course, it doesn't. Because tonight we glide silently toward the sudden, surreal, and hauntingly bizarre death of Queen Sananda Kumarivatana, the royal who drowned because no one dared to save her. It's 1880, and Queen Sananda is both wife and half-sister to King Chulalongkorn. Welcome to royal marriage math. She's adored, pampered, and respected within the palace, with a face so frequently painted and pressed into medallions that even the peasant children recognize her. And today? Today is supposed to be simple. The royal family is traveling by boat to their summer palace at Bangpa-in. You're aboard a grand, gilded barge decorated in layers of red and gold lacquer, with curtains that flutter like prayer flags. It's beautiful, stately, and, if we're honest, completely impractical for emergencies. The waters of the Chao Phraya River sparkle beneath you. Somewhere nearby, musicians strum instruments softly as attendants fawn the royals. Then, without warning, Queen Sananda's boat capsizes. Panic flickers in the air. You see the queen flailing in the river, her young daughter clutched to her chest. The current is pulling them under, and no one moves. Not a single servant jumps in. Not one guard calls for help. You stand frozen with them as the queen and her child vanish beneath the surface like stones, their silken clothes dragging them downward. Because, you see, there's a law. Touching a royal, especially the queen, without permission, is considered a capital offense, even if it's to save her life. The servants know this. They've seen people beaten, imprisoned, or executed for so much as brushing against royalty. So, instead of helping, they watch, paralyzed by centuries of ceremony. Historians still argue whether this is exactly what happened. Some claim at least one boatman tried to save her but was stopped. Others believe it was sheer panic, not law, that froze the crew. But the result is the same. Queen Sunanda and her daughter drown, just feet away from dozens of people. King Chulalongkorn is devastated. Guilt, fury, and heartbreak swirl around the palace. He orders a full investigation, shreds the old customs, and reportedly has several officials punished, not for disobeying the rules, but for following them too literally. He then commissions a memorial at the site of her cremation, an ornate structure with a shrine-like sadness to it. It still stands today, and in the Thai imagination, Queen Sunanda becomes a kind of tragic ghost figure, a woman both too sacred and too human to be saved. There's even a fringe legend that claims her spirit still haunts the riverbanks, appearing on foggy nights, calling out to boatmen with a voice like drifting silk. The deeper tragedy? She was 19 years old, barely more than a teenager, still adjusting to royal life, with a whole lifetime of banquets and slow walks through orchid gardens ahead of her. And she died not by betrayal or enemy plot, but because no one had the courage, or permission to touch her. You walk away from the river slowly, the muddy water lapping at your boots, whispering echoes of superstition and hesitation. It's a cautionary tale, not just about monarchy, but about systems that prize formality over compassion. Let this one sink in slowly like a raft on still water. Sometimes rules can kill. And sometimes the most royal thing you can do is save someone, even if it breaks protocol. The sun is brutal above you now, Egyptian and relentless, beating down on ancient stone and the broken edges of time. You're wandering through dusty corridors deep within a royal tomb, where everything smells of old linen, embalming resin, and secrets. You're here for Tutankhamun, the boy king who became a legend, not for how he lived, but for how strangely he may have died. It's the 14th century BCE. Tutankhamun is around 18 or 19 years old, barely past the phase of teenage sulking, and yet he's pharaoh of the most powerful kingdom on earth. He lives in splendor, gold-plated chariots, perfumed servants, enough jewelry to put a Vegas magician to shame. But beneath the shine, you can already sense it. Something's not right. You watch him limp down a hallway, favoring his left foot. Behind closed doors, he's plagued by pain, by frailty. CT scans and X-rays performed centuries later will reveal a fractured femur, a curved spine, and a clubfoot. And if that weren't enough, he's dealing with malaria, multiple strains. Historians still argue what exactly killed him. Was it the broken leg, untreated and infected? A sudden fall? Genetic issues from too much in-family pharaohing, or was it all of the above? Fringe theories, of course, go wild. Some suggest a chariot crash, maybe even during a ceremonial hunt. Others claim an assassination, a swift blow, to the back of the head from palace rivals. But newer forensic analysis shows no signs of trauma there. The more plausible theory? That he died from complications of a leg injury, worsened by infection and malaria. Which feels awkwardly mundane for a god king. You trail behind as the court physicians attempt to embalm his body, and they botch it. Badly. The body is overcooked. Literally. In their rush, they pour resin over his corpse while it's still hot, possibly burning it. The result? A charred mummy, blackened by the embalming process, fused awkwardly to the coffin. The burial is sloppy. Coffins don't quite fit. Amulets are missing, even the famous golden mask. It's too big, likely intended for someone else. Tut's tomb is small for a pharaoh, crammed and chaotic. His death was so sudden, and his status still so politically delicate, that he seems to have been buried like a backup plan. You look around and realize that even in the afterlife, this poor guy never quite caught a break. And the foot? Oh yes. One of the most peculiar discoveries in his tomb was over 130 walking sticks. Not decorative. Worn. Used. The boy king, painted gloriously on his tomb walls riding chariots and hunting hippos, might have been barely able to walk. The disconnect is enormous. He was the reincarnation of Horus, child of Rus, yet hobbled by hereditary disease and possibly in chronic pain. History carved him into legend, but his real life may have been far lonelier, far more fragile than we imagine. Even the famous Curse of the Pharaohs that followed the discovery of his tomb in 1922, while clearly a spicy PR edition by newspaper writers, adds an ironic touch. The boy who couldn't avoid clumsy death in life ended up terrifying half of Europe in death. You walk away from the tomb, past tourists, hieroglyphs, and air-conditioned display cases. His golden mask stares out from behind glass now, immaculate and iconic. But behind the glamour lies a broken spine, a shattered leg, and a very ungodlike limp. Let this one linger like incense in a temple. Some kings die with chariots and fanfare. Others fade on a sickbed, clutching their side, barely able to breathe. And yet they're remembered not by how they hobbled, but by how they shone in myth. Tutankhamun? He got both. You brush past a towering pair of carved oak doors, and everything inside is velvet. Velvet curtains, velvet whispers, velvet lies. Welcome to the golden twilight of the Russian Empire, where chandeliers drip crystal over powdered wigs and scandal always seems to wear perfume. Tonight, you're easing into the final days of Catherine the Great. And no, let's just get this out of the way. She did not die from that horse. The myth is infamous that Catherine died in the act of, well, horseplay of the most perverse kind. But here's the truth. It never happened. Not even close. That rumor began as a smear campaign, likely spread by French pamphleteers with too much ink and not enough restraint. And like many dirty jokes, it stuck. What did happen, though, was still oddly embarrassing, just in a more realistic, human kind of way. It's 1796. Catherine is in her late 60s, but she's still sharp, commanding, and surprisingly active for her age. You watch her walk the halls of the Winter Palace, passing generals, ministers, and trembling servants. She's just held a meeting with her advisors. The empire is still hers. She retires to her private chamber for a quick bathroom visit before lunch. Nothing dramatic. Just a pause, but then silence. Attendants knock. No answer. Eventually they force the door open and find Catherine collapsed on the floor, unconscious, possibly with her dressing gown tangled beneath her. She's suffered a massive stroke, right there in the palace toilet room, alone, sprawled and surrounded by cold marble and lace doilies. They carry her still unconscious to bed. She never wakes up. No grandeur, no royal declarations, no last poetic words whispered into a flickering fire. Historians still argue about whether she had shown signs of stroke in the days leading up to it. Some say she complained of headaches. Others believe her sudden death was exactly that, sudden. The only certainty is the timing. It ended her reign instantly and left the empire teetering on the edge of uncertainty. But here's where things turn quietly ironic. For all her commanding power, Catherine had not arranged a smooth succession. Her son, Paul, was estranged and increasingly erratic. She had actually been drafting a plan to pass power to her grandson, bypassing Paul altogether. But death caught her mid-edit, literally. So Paul takes the throne, promptly reversing many of her reforms and burning any goodwill she had stockpiled. It's like handing your business empire over to a squirrel in a powdered wig. The real tragedy? Catherine was one of Russia's most enlightened rulers. She corresponded with Voltaire, reformed education, modernized the bureaucracy, and expanded the empire's borders further than almost anyone before her. But her final moment, a slip, a stroke, a collapse in a private bathroom, became the punchline of a century. And that other rumor, it snowballed years after her death, likely because she had the audacity to be a powerful woman with a rich love life and opinions. French satirists and British propagandists couldn't resist. A whisper turned into scandal, which turned into legend. There's even a fringe theory that Paul himself encouraged the rumors posthumously, to undermine her legacy and boost his own. After all, it's easier to rule after a goddess than a laughingstock. You stand now at her tomb in St. Petersburg, beneath marble arches and gold trim. No mention of horses, no winks. Just a cold slab and a name that reshaped a continent. Let this one settle gently. Catherine the Great wasn't undone by passion or politics, but by blood vessels and the randomness of mortality. Her real end wasn't sinful, it was sadly ordinary. And somehow, that's what makes it all the more human. So next time someone brings up that myth, raise an eyebrow and say, actually, hadn't she just slipped? The scent in the room shifts from incense to something sharper, brandy and chemicals. A soft crackle of fire in the hearth becomes your backdrop as you step into the private chamber of King Charles II of Navarre, also known, ironically, as Charles the Bad. And spoiler alert, he doesn't earn that nickname for good decision-making. Tonight, you're about to witness a royal death involving too much brandy, a nun, and the world's most unfortunate bedsheet. We're in the 1380s, in the Kingdom of Navarre, a small but politically sharp region wedged between France and Spain. Charles is aging and ill. He's been poisoned before, possibly by his own enemies, possibly by himself experimenting with alchemy, and his health is in steep decline. He suffers from seizures, anxiety, and something akin to chronic paranoia. Also, he drinks, a lot, and he dabbles in medicine, or what passed for it at the time. You watch his court physicians whisper nervously in a corner, mixing up a new treatment for his latest illness. Some kind of nervous wasting disorder. Their solution? A rub-down of brandy-soaked linens. This is, for the record, not prescribed anywhere in modern medical textbooks. But hey, medieval logic. Alcohol disinfects wounds, right? So naturally, soaking a man head to toe in brandy and wrapping him like a pickled ham should fix everything. Charles lies there, mostly naked, while the attendants complete the process. Brandy seeps into his pores. His skin glistens like a flammable rotisserie chicken. And then the nun appears. Yes, a nun. She's young, inexperienced, and assisting with the care of the king. It's nighttime and candles have been snuffed out. She's handed the final task, sealing the treatment wrap by stitching up the cloth with thread. She grabs the wrong thing. Instead of scissors, she picks up a candle, a lit one. She leans over the alcohol-drenched king to snip the cloth. And just like that, poof. Charles II of Navarre bursts into flames. Wrapped head to toe in linen soaked in brandy, he ignites faster than a dry Christmas tree. The room explodes into panic, screaming, flailing. The nun drops the candle, trips, and someone hurls a pitcher of water. But it's far too late. The flames take hold of his clothes, his hair, even the bed. You stand horrified as attendants throw blankets on top of the burning monarch, only adding more fuel. They finally smother the fire, but Charles is beyond saving. He's a scorched mess of blistered flesh and groaning agony. He dies hours later, raving with pain. The worst part? His mind was sharp until the end. He felt everything. Historians still argue whether this account is literal truth or morbid exaggeration. Some believe the brandy wrap was more symbolic, a kind of alcohol bath that went wrong. Others say the story was altered to reflect Charles's bad reputation, turning a tragic accident into poetic justice. But the specificity of the tale, the stitching, the nun, the wrong tool, suggests someone remembered something firsthand. And even if parts were embellished, the lesson is clear. Charles, a man obsessed with power, alchemy, and self-preservation, was undone by a flammable folk remedy and a nervous assistant with bad eyesight. You leave the room, the scent of scorched linen lingering behind you like a cautionary breeze. His legacy? A cautionary tale, both about the dangers of medieval medicine and the horrifying potential of DIY treatments gone very, very wrong. Let this one flicker like candlelight in your memory. If someone suggests wrapping you in brandy-soaked sheets, just say no. The night air is soft and perfumed as you enter a gleaming Renaissance court. Silks rustling, lutes plucking, cheeks kissing. Everything is etiquette here, choreographed down to the tilt of a fan or the depth of a curtsy. And somewhere beneath all this elegance, a death so ridiculous it makes you want to double-check your lips before you pucker. Tonight, you're witnessing the delicate downfall of King Charles VIII of France, also known as the monarch who may have died from a kiss. It's 1498, and Charles VIII is young, energetic, and oddly fond of door frames. You're at the Chateau d'Amboise, wandering the grand corridors of one of France's most opulent royal residences. The king is hosting a lavish tennis match. Yes, indoor court tennis, like all the fanciest folks did before anyone invented Wimbledon. He's excited, giddy even. After all, he just got back from an ill-fated campaign in Italy where he tried and failed to conquer Naples. So, what better way to relax than to watch a sweaty, high-speed game surrounded by nobles pretending to understand the rules? Now, here's where things get weird. Charles decides to visit the match via an unusually small quarter. And in his enthusiasm, possibly turning to blow a kiss to a nearby noblewoman, according to some accounts, he slams his forehead against a low door lintel. Right into the stone. Hard. You hear the dull thud. The king stumbles. He laughs it off at first. Oh, how clumsy of me. Waves away concerned whispers and proceeds to watch the game. But an hour later, Charles collapses. He seizes, vomits, and loses consciousness. He never wakes up. Just like that, dead from a doorframe. Or possibly a kiss distraction meets skull trauma combo. Historians still argue about the precise cause. Was it an undiagnosed aneurysm triggered by the blow? Did he have a pre-existing condition that made the impact fatal? Or did the king's courtly showboating cost him his crown? Some fringe theories suggest foul play, that maybe the door was too conveniently low, that maybe someone wanted Charles to take that fateful knock. But most experts agree it was just a stupid, embarrassing accident, which, for a king who spent years embroiled in high-stakes European wars trying to assert dominance over Italy, is just kind of tragicomic. The real kicker? Charles VIII had no surviving sons. His unexpected death immediately triggered a succession crisis. The Valois dynasty began to crumble. France plunged into decades of instability, all because someone didn't think to hang a "mind your head" sign in the hallway. And what about the kiss? Well, several gossipy chroniclers note that Charles was known for his exaggerated affection. He would kiss both men and women in the court on the cheek, often twice, sometimes thrice. One writer claims he was mid-greeting, leaning in with royal grace when his head met its doom. Whether that's true or a dramatic flourish, it's a poetic image. A monarch literally dying from his own ceremonial affection. You pause near the doorway at Chateau d'Amboise, where it supposedly happened. They have since raised the ceiling, of course, but the legend remains. One of those royal tales that French schoolchildren giggle over between history lessons. A king? A kiss? A doorframe? Let this tale plant itself gently in your memory like a peck on the cheek. Sometimes all the crowns and castles in the world can't protect you from architecture, or from trying to be just a little too charming in the wrong place at the wrong time. You step through an ivy-draped archway into the heart of medieval Hungary, where everything smells like damp stone, roasting boar, and the faint metallic tang of regret. The court is quieter here. Less pomp, more politics. Less splendor, more superstition. Tonight, you're arriving just in time to witness the very weird, very undignified end of King Bela I of Hungary. A monarch whose final act may or may not have involved a snail, a broken throne, and brace yourself, a fatal fart. It's the year 1063. Bela I has ruled Hungary for just a few stormy years, navigating power struggles between noble houses, constant threats from the Holy Roman Empire, and even his own brother. You can feel the pressure mounting like a badly sealed wine cask. You're in his throne room, a dark, heavy space with banners drooping in the stale air. A few servants scurry about, trying not to breathe too loudly. Bela has been injured recently. Some say he fell from his throne. Others say he was kicked by a horse. Either way, he's walking funny, and the court physicians are whispering about spinal complications and internal ruptures. So far, so tragic. But then comes the version, the one you won't find in every textbook. Some medieval chroniclers, anonymous ones naturally, claim Bela's death involved a snail. Yes. The story goes that he was out walking in the palace garden when he stepped on a snail, slipped, and fell backward onto the stone steps. Others embellish further. He'd landed awkwardly, struck his backside, and in the moments following suffered either a hernia, an aneurysm, or, according to one extremely colorful account, farted so violently that it ruptured something internally and killed him. Now let's pause. Is it true? Probably not. Historians still argue over whether Bela died from trauma, illness, or stroke. The snail and fart version has no hard evidence, but, oh, it lives in legend. You can picture it, though. A tired, overburdened monarch, perhaps humorously clumsy in his later years, betrayed not by sword or scheming, but by gravity and gastrological misfortune. A fringe theory even suggests this version was created deliberately by political enemies, meant to humiliate his memory. Because in the brutal court gossip games of the Middle Ages, nothing reduced a man's legacy faster than making him the punchline to a bodily function joke. Still, the more credible narrative is this. Bela was injured seriously while seated on a throne that collapsed beneath him. Whether from structural failure or a misstep, the fall rendered him unable to walk or rule effectively. He died soon after, likely from complications related to those injuries. Yet the other version persisted. Because once a monarch's name is associated with snails and explosive gas, well, good luck scrubbing that from the royal record. You pass beneath the vaulted ceiling of Shakespeare Cathedral, where Bela is buried in a grand tomb of white marble, flanked by solemn statues of angels. No snails, no giggles, no warning signs about slippery stones or digestive safety. But you can't help but smirk, because Bela's strange little legend, true or not, serves as the perfect ending to this long, embarrassing royal parade. A king undone by biology. A court too afraid to laugh. A chronicle probably written by a monk with way too much imagination and not enough supervision. And you know what? There's something deeply human about that. Because for all their power, these monarchs, mighty, mysterious, often mythologized, couldn't escape the smallest, silliest, most inconvenient truths. A goose joke, a too tight coffin, a broken chair, a fart in the wrong moment, and now the palace doors close behind you. The laughter fades into the marble. The velvet curtains fall, slow and soft, over centuries of awkward exits. You rest your head and breathe in the stillness. Let the echo of footsteps fade. Let the heavy crowns tilt gently to the side. Let the absurdity settle like candle wax in a room that's seen too many secrets. These weren't just rulers, they were people. Fragile, foolish, flammable. Sometimes taken down by poison or politics, but just as often, by banquets, bad luck, or biology. The great and powerful brought low not by enemy swords, but by overeating, slipping, tripping, laughing, or trusting a badly placed chair. It's funny, it's strange, and it's comforting, somehow. Because if emperors can fall into toilets, maybe it's okay when your day doesn't go perfectly either. So close your eyes now. The court is asleep. The candles have burned down to their final golden pools. History is still there, humming quietly in the dark. Not as triumphs carved in marble, but as stories. Weird, wobbly, wonderful stories. Good night, fellow time traveler. Dream softly and don't forget to look where you're walking.